They go on to win this one 20-13. Fields' final line, 14 of 20 for $142, 2 total touchdowns. And Bears fans can only leave this one with a smile on their face. They were 3-point favorites in this spot as well. They cover that 3. This one comes in under the 35.5. And as Chicago goes, the defense goes. A couple of takeaways for that Bears defense. Taking a deeper dive into Fields' day here. That first 3 drives in the first half, as we said, a little bit rushed. 2-minute drill did prove positive with a field goal before the break. So getting the quarterback into some situations and watching how he develops in those moments was good for the Bears there before the half. And then in the second half, really solid. 12 of 14, poised, composed, $132 through the air. And those 2 touchdowns that got Bears fans feeling real good about the future of their quarterback position. For instant reaction, we welcome in our guy, CBS NFL analyst Ryan Wilson. Ryan, the Bears bettering the Fins in this one to open up a preseason extravaganza on Saturday. Plenty to dig into on both sides of these as both fan bases hope to have their answer at quarterback. Let's begin with Justin Fields. Fields 14 of 20, $142, 1 by land, 1 by air. Showed off the speed, the touch, most apparent to me, the poise. How impressed were you by Fields here in this maiden voyage?
Joe, it was a slow start, and then he turned on the gas. It felt like that Justin Fields got comfortable. At the end of the first half, he led a drive that resulted in a field goal after a pretty sluggish start, and understandably so. This was his first time on the field as a member of the Bears. The first-round pick, as you mentioned, his first drive was 3 and out. He came in later in the second quarter, muffed a snap, threw a seam ball that should have been intercepted, and then fumbled on a scramble. And then after that, the lights sort of came on. I mentioned the end of first half drive to get a field goal. Then he came out in the second half, and he was dealing. He looked exactly like the Justin Fields we saw the last 2 years at Ohio State. You mentioned the poise in the pocket, something we haven't seen from Bears quarterbacks in some time, perhaps going back to Jim McMahon. And that has Bears fans so excited. As a Bears fan, Joe, I'm sure you were thinking after the first 2 or 3 series, like, okay, what's going on here? And he just needed to settle in. And that's a great news for Justin Fields, great news for Bears fans, perhaps most importantly, great news for Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, the coach and general manager, who are in desperate need of a franchise quarterback because they have been not so great in identifying those players in recent years.
Hey, Ryan, I just asked the questions here. All right, you do the answering, so we're going to keep things moving here, but it was a positive outcome in the end of things. No overreactions, but we do have reactions. It is the smallest of sample size that can't warrant any sort of major overreaction, but if Matt Nagy's left to pour over this type of film 2 more times, are you of the belief that Justin Fields can do enough to change minds and strategies and earn this Bears starting job prior to week 1?
So I wonder if Matt Nagy's playing 4D chess with us, because when they drafted Justin Fields, my big concern was, okay, Nagy and Pace are on the hot seat. They almost probably were thought about getting fired after last season. They came back. So here's the deal. Don't rush Justin Fields out there. That was the first thing I said after he was drafted. I love the idea of trading up for him. Maybe Matt Nagy's saying, hey, Andy Dalton's our guy. The social media team sent out the tweet that Andy Dalton's our QB1 a few months ago. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to play Justin Fields a whole bunch in the preseason, get everyone's whet everyone's appetite for just how good this kid is, and then I'll succumb to peer pressure and just have to put the kid out there. And whatever happens, happens. You know, maybe that's best case for Justin Fields. Our guy Pete Prisco loves the idea of playing the young player. Justin Fields proved himself today in this, again, and you noted this. It's one preseason game. I don't know if we can read too much into it, but it's a step in the right direction. If we see 2 more weeks of this from Justin Fields, that's a long, hard conversation. And I think, you know, you and I talked about this last week about when we could see Justin Fields. I think week 1 is too early. Week 2 is probably too early as well. Maybe week 4 or 5 is realistic in terms of Justin Fields becoming the starter should the Bears stumble out of the gate.
Yeah, you know how I feel about it. Give them the Lions in week 4 and see how it goes from there. I'll give you one overreaction here. That was the best footwork I've seen out of a Bears quarterback in my 30 years on this earth. I know the bar is not all that high, but bright things ahead here for Justin Fields, hopefully for the Bears faithful. On the other side of this matchup, Tua Tagovailoa, rock solid until his final throw of the day. Really just an unacceptable red zone pick, trying to fit it into a window there at the goal line. It's exactly the type of stuff that the Bama product needs to get out of his game, but all in all, 8 of 11, 99 yards over 3 drives, drove the ball down the field nicely a couple times. And if you're a Dolphins fan, you're walking away from this snapshot of Tagovailoa thinking what?
I think you're taking a sigh of relief because I wanted to see exactly what Tua had, and you touched on it. He drove some of those balls down the field. We didn't see that last year, almost certainly because of the hip injury he had to overcome from the previous year that cut short his Alabama season. But he drove some balls today, showed a little zip on that arm that we haven't seen in 2 years, had the touch pass to Gesicki on the 50-yard gain, and then you mentioned the interception in the end zone. One thing that I did notice with both he and Justin Fields, and again, it's not a big deal, these are young quarterbacks, but they did hold the ball a touch too long as they tried to get through their reads, and a lot of times these young quarterbacks struggle to go from read 1 to reads 2, 3, and 4 if you get that far, and I get it. That's part of the learning process, but I thought there was a lot of positives with Tua. If he hadn't thrown that pick on the final play there, he just missed it. You're right, you can't make that throw, but he just missed completing a really tight window throw, and if he just dumped that off for a 4 or 5 yard game, we're all sort of really excited about Tua. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's made huge strides from where I saw him today, from the way things ended last season when there were a lot of doubts about who this guy could be as a quarterback. So again, movement in the right direction for Tua. He just happened to be overshadowed by Justin Fields, but I think it's good news for both fan bases looking for those franchise quarterbacks.
Yeah, just a mini pump, maybe got to that read, as you said, a second too late there, led to the INT. Got to give credit here to both of these defensive units. Dolphins secondary looks like they're too deep at every position. Bears football, as they do, a nose for the football, but again, emotional discretion is advised. We can't get too high, you can't get too low when it comes to preseason output. But simply from an analysis standpoint, Ryan, what sort of signs are you looking for out of these first and second year quarterbacks throughout the exhibitions?
Well, I'll tell you this. You touched on the defenses. Those defenses are going to be incredibly important for the advancement of those young quarterbacks because we know historically if you have a great defense and a young quarterback, those two things go together really well. So maybe we see more of that from the Bears and Dolphins defenses respectively as we get through the preseason and into the regular season. That's only going to help Tua and Justin Fields do what they need to do. So what happens for the rest of the preseason for Tua? I think he builds on what we saw today. That's exactly what Brian Flores, the coach, needs to happen. And then you go into the season with confidence. They're in a tough division, obviously, that features the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen. For Justin Fields, we sort of talked about it. When are we going to see him? I know Matt Nagy understands that even though they signed Andy Dalton to a 10-year, 1-year deal, a $10 million 1-year deal, he ain't going to be the long-term answer. And just a matter of whether it's week 1, which I don't think it will be. You mentioned week 4 with the Lions, week 2 are the Bengals. So there are going to be some points there, some pressure points on that schedule for the Bears where you can introduce Justin Fields. But I think it's also going to come down to what happens in the rest of that division. Not so much with the Packers, we know how they're going to be, but with obviously the Vikings and to a lesser extent the Lions. But I think this is a great sign for both quarterbacks in terms of getting off on the right foot. Just a few days after Mac Jones had a pretty impressive showing too in his debut. The difference I will say is that Tua and Justin pushed the ball down the field while Mac Jones had more of a dink and duck approach to his debut.
I will once again remind our viewers that the season-long win total, 17 weeks, is 5.5 for your Chicago Bears. You can only lead a horse to water. Ryan Wilson, we thank you as always. And for more, be sure to download and subscribe the Pick 6 podcast. Our guys breaking down all of the preseason action each and every week throughout the NFL preseason and regular season. There's only one place to be. It's with the Pick 6 pod.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.